I just want to say what an incredible honor it is to be here, not only at this conference, but also to have a chance to speak with you, Ellen. So thank you very much. Bravery, perseverance, resilience. I mean, these are some of the words that people use to describe you. I think you're an amazing role model. And when I was doing my research, I realized that you yourself had some pretty incredible role models. Your parents, for example. Your father was a professor of mathematics at NYU. Your mother, a computer science major at Penn. How much of growing up with your parents has to do with who you are today?
They had a huge impact on me. So they were very science-oriented. They believed in hard work. And what had gotten them to the US to study was the whole rocket science program that Kennedy started. So the idea of working hard, being able to do well, and then coming to the United States and being able to study, getting scholarships to study, and getting great jobs, and being able to raise their kids in this environment was really important to them. And this idea of a meritocracy was something that they instilled in us really early on, that if you work hard, you'll be rewarded, which has driven most of my career and has enabled me to do everything that I've been able to do so far.
So that's interesting you brought up meritocracy. You were brought up in the principles that the world is a meritocracy. And yet then you enter law and then you enter the VC world. And clearly when you were in the VC world, you found yourself in a position where you began to realize that perhaps this wasn't exactly a meritocracy. Can you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think it's easy to believe that things are a meritocracy. It's what people aspire to be. It's how people talk about their companies. It's how people talk about their industries. But you start seeing like little things that don't really fit in, and you try to explain it away. Well, that's just that one guy, or oh, that's just this one situation, or maybe I should have been a little bit more aggressive here. And then you realize all of a sudden all these things are adding up, and they don't make sense in the world that is a meritocracy. And you see it happening to other people who are all women, or are all one type of person, or are not another type of person. And all of a sudden you realize, wow, this is not a meritocratic environment. And it doesn't matter how often they say it. I still see that I'm not invited to these things. And no woman is invited because they're women. That is not a meritocratic environment. And you start wondering, why is it, and how do I fix it?
Well, so that's a really good point, and I'm sure that there are so many women in this room that feel these. I know that in the tech world, a lot of women call them the microaggressions, but I think if there's one thing I learned in making this documentary, this is not just in tech, right? This crosses all sorts of industry. These microaggressions, death by 1,000 cuts, the thing that drive women from the workforce. Yeah. So at what point did you realize that this wasn't something that you should just let roll off your back?
It's a good question. I think early on, I would start to raise issues like, oh, I don't think that was really great how that person treated this woman. They were really toxic towards her in a way that I thought was unprofessional, and let me raise it to one of the managers, and let me start raising all these small issues. But nothing was being done. Like, these things would continue to happen. And it got to a point where I was like, you just see it happening, and it's getting worse, and all of a sudden you see like these people have been at this place for 7 years and they're not making progress. All of the women who were junior partners when I was at my firm are no longer there. Like, none of them got promoted to the general partner track, and none of them, well, I guess they did, but they're all gone now. Right? So it's not, how can this be a meritocratic environment where women have an equal shot at being successful if none of them stay in the system?
I think a lot of women are afraid to speak up the way you do, which is, I think, why you were so brave. So can you talk about when you got to this decision to actually bring this into the public eye, to actually bring this to court where you knew that you were really exposing yourself and your family?
I was afraid to speak up for a long time. Like, I would be happy to bring up in private situations to a person that I trusted, like, oh, I don't think this is the right thing, but I wouldn't call it out in a meeting, because you would get, you would be seen as that annoying person who keeps bringing up these women issues. At least that's what I was worried about. So, it took a long time. It took seeing that it was happening to other women. It took hearing that there was a problem that another woman had raised with harassment that wasn't being addressed. She had gone to every managing partner with a letter detailing what had happened to her. And the response was, "You should feel flattered." And to me, they had promised me that they were going to take care of this problem. And it was clear that they weren't willing to address it head on.
So in 2012, you brought Kleiner Perkins to court. Very well publicized. I know that many of us watched it, and with great admiration because of your bravery. Ultimately, they ruled against you. Why? What went wrong? What would you have done differently?
I think the one thing that would have helped me is if I had had more cash to invest in it. If I had had $10 million to hire the teams of lawyers, to hire the nasty PR firm, to hire the groups of people that were needed to influence the public opinion, to influence the jury, to influence how we selected the jury. At the end, everybody who said that they believed that tech was biased was kicked out of the jury pool. So you end up with this very odd mix of people who don't think tech is unfair, and so when they hear the stories, they don't believe it. I think the legal system is not a great mechanism for resolving disputes because it shares some of the fundamental systematic issues that these industries face around whether women are believed, how women are perceived, whether you can manipulate a stereotype to try to fit a story into it. It wasn't a great experience either. I talked to several women before I litigated, and these were women who sued investment banks. And they're just like, don't do it. We don't regret doing it, and we're very grateful for the experience and the opportunity to create change within our organizations, but it is so hard. It is just, you would not wish it on your worst enemy. It is brutal. But once you get through it, you realize, you connect with so many people. There are so many people who just stop me in the street to say thank you, who have felt the courage to share their own stories, whether it's just with a colleague or with their kids or with their friends, where people are now understanding that this is going on everywhere. I mean, I'm at a general conference, not a tech conference, in Massachusetts, not in California, because people are interested in hearing these stories, and they have their own experiences.
So let me just make sure I get this right. You actually seek the advice of people that had gone to court over this issue before. They told you not to do it, and you do it anyway. What was it in you that drove you, knowing that this would be something that would be a difficult process?
That's a good question. I look back, I don't think I understood the magnitude of how hard it was going to be. I didn't understand that I would have to stay and go to work every day after having filed suit. And I didn't understand how many people would turn on me and the ways that they would do it. I understood it conceptually, but I didn't understand emotionally how hard that would be.
So if you could rewind, would you do it all again?
Yes. So I come out of it the same way that everybody else does, yes. I've heard so many stories. I've connected with so many people. I get to meet you. I mean, it's been a very wonderful experience from the other side, where people, they really connect because we've all had these experiences. We've been afraid to talk about them. And now there's a kind of framework for thinking about it. And people are sharing research. Just down the street, Babson College has done some great research. Harvard Business School has done some great research to show that all of these little things in these experiences that we're having, they're real. It's not in our imagination. It's not us being sensitive. It's not us looking for problems that don't exist. This is a very real problem, and having people talk about it and tell their stories, even if it's just to one or two other people, is very powerful. I had somebody stop me on the street, I guess about 3 weeks ago. It was a white man, young, and he wanted to say thank you, and I was very curious. He said, "I want to thank you because I know what you're doing for people, and even though it doesn't affect me, I have a coworker who was sexually harassed, and she didn't do anything about it because the system is so bad. But because you've gone out to tell tell what happened to you, that's helping everyone. So thank you for that. So the stories are working, like people are understanding it, and you don't have to go out and sue and take on the risk and the experience that I had. But if you can help people understand, if you can speak up for other people who aren't comfortable speaking up for themselves, it makes a difference. I think people sharing their stories with me helped fuel me through the process. It was hard, but I would get emails from people who would share their stories about the experiences they had and how grateful they were that somebody was finally speaking up.
So sexism these days is very different than it was in what I call like the Mad Men era, right? Where it was sort of really blatant and obvious, and you could say, he said this to me or he made me do that. Again, these days, it's more latent, it's subtle, and yet it's equally offensive. So what advice would you give your daughter? What advice would you give the women in the room that feel subject to this kind of behavior in the workplace?
I would think about, is this the right place for me? Right. So the first thing is, can I handle it? This is an obstacle, and it might be better someplace else. It shows up almost everywhere, so it's not like you can get away from it. But is this an environment where, do I want to be the only woman on this team of 100 employees? Right? Can I handle it? And if I can't, then, it's not. You don't have to force yourself to. You don't have to prove and be that first person unless you really want to. I would also think, the things that helped me was just focus. I would focus on the things that I really loved about my job. I love working with entrepreneurs. I loved helping them. So those were the things that I would think about and that I would spend time really enjoying. And I would know that these other parts that I had to deal with were all for the cause of being able to have this awesome experience. And then the last piece is just know that you're not alone. Know that there are so many other people who are having these same experiences, who are pushing forward, and that what you're doing is making a difference. Even if you don't feel that way, even if it feels very lonely, you are not alone. And that was a really powerful message I got.
How important is finding a mentor or a sponsor within the company? Did you feel like you had somebody you could go speak to?
That's a good question. I had somebody who was my mentor, but he didn't look like me. He didn't experience the things I had experienced, so it was very difficult to get the same opportunities. I think it's important, but it's hard. So yes, everybody should have a sponsor, somebody who's pushing them through and making sure they get the opportunities and telling them that they should get promoted and helping get the raise. But you can't depend on it, right? If you can get one and you see that opportunity, you should take advantage of it. Everybody else is, and you shouldn't feel like there's somebody who's favoring you, because everybody's getting favored. But it's not always possible.
Yeah, in the last couple of years since we made the documentary, something that came to the forefront of the discussion was the importance of instilling confidence in our daughters. I know you have a daughter, I have a daughter, many women and men in this room have daughters. How do we prepare them to be able to be successful in the corporate environment or in startup culture?
That's a good question. I think the biggest piece is giving them confidence, letting them know what their skills are, and making sure that they're aware that they may face these hurdles, being aware of what the situation is. So I think it's much better these days than when we were coming out, because we never talked about it. It was always just this thing that happened, and there weren't enough of us to talk about things, right? So we would, something would happen and you just kind of wonder, was that me, or was there something wrong going on? But now it's all out there. People are sharing their experiences. The power of social media is incredible, where somebody can share a story, and I can hear about somebody who's working in a small company in a small town but had this experience that resonated with so many people. Those stories are getting shared, and they're starting to see the patterns. The research is being done. So this is actually something that's very real. Knowing that it's out there helps you understand what's going on, and hopefully you can spend less time trying to figure things out.
So after you left Kleiner Perkins, you were at Reddit, and you had a very powerful position there for a woman. You were CEO, and you made some changes early on to the company. You want to talk a little bit about that and about that experience? And
yeah, we had a great team of people. but we were a startup. So we had started, it had gotten sold, then they spun it off. So there was a lot of turmoil in the history of the company. The last CEO who came in before me was from Facebook, this awesome guy, Ishan Wong, and he wanted to make it a more fair system because it had been kind of scrappy, not a lot of process, a lot of anomalies in how things were done. And he started putting in no negotiation policies, testing it out, and seeing what would happen if new recruits were just given an offer. So you don't have to negotiate, we're just going to give you an offer, and we're not going to play any games with you, we'll give you a fair salary. Once he left and I came in as CEO, I made that a formal policy. So we looked through the numbers, and they were generally pretty fair, but you could see where there were some people who were really aggressive or who had a better relationship with the hiring manager who would end up getting paid more than somebody who was doing a comparable job or somebody who had more experience. So we ended up trying to fix all of those things and then trying to make sure that didn't happen again. So myself and the recruiting lead would look at all of the different offers. First, we set it up to figure out what is a fair offer. So we created bands based on experience and the role and the function to figure out what should people be paid, and then we would give them an offer, either high in cash or high in equity. You pick which offer that you want, but this is the best offer that we would give somebody who negotiated and pushed us all the way to the limit.
And so was your focus there also on gender and on making sure that there was no disparity between the pay of women and the pay with men?
That was my initial concern, that there was going to be some gender disparity or some disparity based on race. And it turned out there wasn't really anything based on that, but there were definitely anomalies that were more random.
That's something that we learned, I thought was fascinating, was that when there usually is a difference in pay between genders, often, even if men and women are brought in at the same level, what ends up happening is that men ask for raises more often than women do. So the biggest gap in pay and in salary between men and women comes 10 years down the line because women don't ask for raises. So again, goes back to confidence, right?
So we were mostly a new company where most of the people had been hired within the last year. So people, although if I look back, all of the people who asked for raises were men, if I remember correctly.
My point, exactly. So women ask for raises. I think
because everybody else is.
Yes,
right?
Exactly. I think the importance of bringing men into this discussion can't be, I mean, it's so important. So how do we gain more male allies?
That is a very good question. I think it's by people telling their stories. So I get stopped on the street a lot by men because they have heard or they've read or they have moms who worked. So, there were a couple people, one guy told me that his mom had been relegated to a broom closet after she got promoted. So that part of my story of getting into a crappy office was the one that resonated with him. Somebody else talked about how his mom had been demoted after she had sought a promotion. So there are parts of your stories that will resonate with men as well, and they'll see it through their friends, or they'll see it through their coworkers, or they'll see it through their family members, and that's the piece where all of a sudden it becomes emotional and real for them.
Yeah, I've noticed that a lot of men really care about the behavior in the workplace when they have daughters.
Yeah.
Interesting thing, if I say to a room full of men, how many of you have daughters, stand up, and then how many of you want your daughters going into your workplace as it is now? Most of them sit down.
Yeah.
So I think that's when change begins to happen. So what comes next for you?
I am excited to be here to speak. It's not something that is natural for me. I'm an introvert, but I think I'm just so appreciative of all the support I've received from so many women, from so many people who've had these experiences or have seen others who have had these experiences or who are frustrated with the way the world is now, that coming out and sharing my story again and just being grateful and spending some time with everybody has been extremely rewarding. I've been writing a little bit. I wrote something for Lenny Letter. I just had something come out today in The Hollywood Reporter. I'm basically taking some time off through the rest of the year to kind of just process everything that happened to me over this past year. It was an incredibly difficult year. And I'm just spending time with my family, getting reconnected with friends, talking with people about the problems that we're seeing in the workplace and how can we fix them. At some point, I will go back to work in a company, probably a startup. I've been meeting with a few friends to try to figure out if there's something that we want to do. It's, there was a big part of me, I just wanted to go home and move to Hawaii and not deal with anybody anymore. But I just, I want to show people you can complain and you can make a difference and you can survive and you can be out there and you can still have a positive outlook on the world and you can still help other people. And that's really important to me.
The court ultimately ruled against you, but I want to thank you as a mother, as a woman, as a businesswoman. I know there are many of the women in the room that agree with me that you stood up and you spoke up, and you're an incredible role model. So thank you. Thank you for doing that.
Thank you. And thank all of you.